Can you speak a little louder? I can't hear you.
Yeah, I was sitting at a rugby, and this really struck me because the trees, like, it was beautiful on this place on your front that happened with the light filtering through. It was so beautiful, and it almost looked like we had halos, like the shadows, like there's like a light green effect around shadows, like chairs where we were sitting, and it just was really beautiful. And then just the quality of the light in general, I feel like this time of year is very crisp.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say, I don't know what the exact word for it would be, maybe that's what I'm trying to say, but I feel like when the transition from winter to spring, there's just something about the light that's, I don't want to say harsh, but fresh. I just noticed that in quality, especially because it was an afternoon.
Mm-hmm. So was this right after it rained, or was it on a very clear day?
It was on a clear day.
Okay. So that may have something to do with it. But the important thing is it's your perception of it. Your perception of it is that it was fresh and clear and sharp. So, anybody else?
I do.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna read my first one because I like my first one better.
Sure.
But I have my second one. So for my light observation, do you want me to just read it? Or do you
Sure.
want me to okay. For light observation, I said to look in the evening time when there's actually less light. I looked around the campus at night, finding the locations that were really affected by the subtraction and addition of light. I found a street light that was surrounded by tree branches. The time that I looked at the tree and the light was about 9:30 at night. The first thing I noticed was the obvious absence of overhead light. Without the overhead light, i.e. natural light, it allowed for isolation in the street light, letting the effect of the light shine through. The light was strong and did not have to fight for its beams to be seen. This brought me to the idea of isolation. Isolation means many things and shows us many things as well. Because I was looking at it more decoratively, I was able to visually experience it as an object. I was also able to think about where it came out of in the streetlight, how it had different, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Okay, the light came out on all sides because it was circular. And it was also a warmer light than most streetlights. Most streetlights being more isolating. But they also tend to only come out of the bottom, shining a very cold white light, creating isolation on anyone that stands underneath its beams. But with this light, it seemed to be warmer, still isolating, but more in the light itself. The interaction with the tree was also interesting, only highlighting some of the branches, focusing your attention in a specific area of the tree. This again showed the power of isolation and allowed me to see what it was the light was focused on. If the light was not on that part of the tree, then I did not think I would even given that part of the tree a second thought. I'm excited to explore this idea of isolation more.
That's great. It's really interesting to listen to you and to Sophia to hear the words that you use. And when you're speaking with choreographers and directors, it's really important that you listen very, very carefully to the words that they use. Elizabeth used some words, like she said, overhead, and then she said, what did you say, overhead light?
I meant like natural light.
Right. So it's important, even if a director said overhead and you weren't sure what he meant, that's when you have to ask a question. Like if Elizabeth hadn't said that, we would be like, where's there an overhead light outside? You know, so very important to listen to words, not only to express yourself, to be sure that you understand what the other person you're talking to is saying. Okay, anybody else?
So this is my first wedding observation. So it was a moment when I was at dinner with friends on a weekend, and my friends and I were sitting at like a round table, and the restaurant was pretty dark, but there was just one downlight, like a light from above on our table, so it just kind of like highlighted just this giant circle table. But the moment that I picked was my friend was drinking out of a clear cup of water, but her hand was like hiding the cup, so the only way you could tell there was like liquid in it was because the downlight casted through the cup of water and onto the table. And so you could see the shadow on the table, but it wasn't like, you know, if you had like a regular cup, it would have been probably a dark shadow, but the shadow was different, so you could see the water moving in it. So I said that it was kind of like the, like, almost like a natural gobo in a sense.
Yeah,
Of the light moving through the water cup onto the table.
yeah, right. I think there used to be, and maybe still is, a way of to create water on stage, actually shining a light through water and then somehow through mirrors, projecting that onto the stage. I don't know if, did anybody ever see the musical Sunset Boulevard? 'Cause it starts out with the body floating in a pool, and they did a very good job doing that. Anybody else? Okay.
This is mine from the first observation. I was like noticing this thing about like the clouds and the sun, like just like the way that they were hitting each other. It looked like there were these like great like beams of light that were very like this like heavenly scene where just there was this opening in the clouds and like throughout the whole sky there were just beams of light, and I was like talking about how they both like seemed like kind of transparent and like also, but you could tell that there's something there. So like I don't know, I thought that was interesting. I talked about like a bit of the color of the light and how like it was like purely white compared to like all the other light that like I saw like below the sky, and then just like it had like pattern or the contrast between like the shadows and the clouds, and like some areas where it was like a lot brighter and some areas where it was a lot darker. So yeah, just like a lot of those like contrasting shadows and those like huge beams that like when I first saw it I was driving and it looked like I was covering like a long distance, but like it was so big in the sky like you could really see it and
Mm-hmm. Great. Sounds like you were really looking at it very, very carefully. Anna or Julia, do you have a lighting observation?
For my first lighting observation paper, I chose like a moment from a show that I saw. And like, it was really interesting the way that the lighting designer had done this like part. Because like the only things that were on stage was the dress form and the actor and the prop that the actor was holding. And there was just one single light shining directly above the dress form, like I would say like half a foot away from it. And it was like red, but it was like a swinging light. So every move that the actor made, the light swung. And then there was like a little bit of light shining on the actor so that you could kind of see his face. But it was like still really dark, and one figure was dark. And so like, it like, just that moment created such like uneasiness with the light swinging and like the minimal extra light around. Like it was just like I have another one that I should.
So was there any kind of feeling or mood that you associated with it?
Yeah, so like in that moment, I felt like extreme terror. Like I literally thought that I was gonna die in my seat. Like it was insane because like the light swinging and like the shadows that it casted on the objects on the stage, like created like a feeling of like uneasiness and like eerie, like weird stuff. And then with the actors' movements, which were like really heavy and like sporadic, it like completely, it was very like terrifying. Yeah. And then I think that it started strobing halfway through too, so like you could see for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It was so scary. And I was in the first row. I was actually, and you had a hatchet, so I was
That'd be scary. So be sure you do some observations of light in the real world as well.
yeah, I feel
Just
like-
because often on the stage we have to create our version of that or sometimes try to recreate it exactly.
Observation of, like, shelf in the library, like a little corner over there.
Julia?
Did my, on the day, like, the afternoon, in my room, depending on the time of the day, the natural light from the sunshine clothes shades. In the morning, it was a bright light that looks good. It was very fun and welcoming because of how bright the sun is shining. It illuminates the whole room and makes the room very light. The light makes me feel more alert because in the afternoon around 5 o'clock, the natural light slowly starts to fade. I have to turn on the light in the room. The natural light that shines through the blinds casts a big shadow on the objects that are hidden. The artificial light in the room only illuminates half of the room and makes the other half of the room look dull. The bulb is a bit yellow and it is very bright. It is also covered with a white silicone shade to make the light not shine too bright. Having half the room dark and the other half a little brighter gives the room a clear vibe in the morning. At night, the only light that makes it is the artificial one. It's much more dull than the light from the sun, and it makes me very sleepy. The light is in the corner of the room, but it still lights up the entire.
That's great. Kelsey, did you have time to do this? I know you joined the class late.
I did.
Okay, great.
So I was talking to my teammates, and she has a vanity mirror that was, like I think the full, she has a dimmer on her vanity, but I think it was on full, and she was hearing lights going across a wire string lights going across her ceiling, and but she was basically the half of it that the vanity and half not, and so it looked. I like the way the light was hitting her because half of her face was very illuminated, and then the other half had this like glow to it, but it wasn't necessarily dark. It looked like it was a shadow, but it wasn't because it was extreme lights. Really calm, really feeling.
Okay, great. That's good job, everyone. You're taking the time to look at light, and that's what is important. So does anybody have any questions about what we did last week? We are moving through lighting design so quickly so that we can get to this project. Please keep asking me questions if there are things that are not clear. I do want to go over something that we looked at last week, and it's complicated, but let's go. So I passed out this data sheet. This is the data sheet for an ETC source 4 36 degree, which was in fact one of the lights we looked at last week. There is a data sheet online for every lighting instrument that we use and any lighting instrument that anyone else uses. The reason I wanted to go over this is until you know how much light can come out of an individual instrument and how much area it can cover, you cannot pick the lights for a design. So what is a particular note here is if you go to the back, at the top of the page, it says photometrics. So photometrics is, it's extremely important in the light that we pick. It's actually, you have to know the photometrics of every lighting instrument, otherwise you really can't use it effectively. So if you look down, there's a little table there with the throw distance, and underneath that is the field diameter. And then below that is illuminance, and FC, that stands for foot candles. And when I talk today, I'm going to be talking about foot candles, not about lumens. They're the same thing, but there's just a different term, and they have different mathematical equations on how you arrive there. So before I go on to the specifics of this, I want to talk about the difference between beam angle and field angle. If you see in that illustration above, you can see in the middle, there's the beam angle. And this is what the beam angle is. Beam angle is the measurement of the fixture's light output angle until the output has fallen off to 50%. This means that you disregard the light out of that 50% and above zone for this measurement, which makes it helpful in knowing how much usable light the fixture puts out in a fairly even field. So basically, the beam angle is telling us how much area of the stage it can hit. And then the field angle is the measurement of the fixture's light output angle until the output has fallen off to 10%. This means that you disregard the light out of that zone for this measurement, though that's not much. This angle tells you how far the light reaches until it basically fades into the darkness. So with that information, I'm going to try to describe the light output and the foot candles so that you know what kind of lighting instrument to pick. So let's look at the table. And I have to apologize first. Lighting design is extremely mathematical. And we're actually skipping over the mathematics, but this is something that we really cannot skip over. So so we are looking at the column that says 25 feet, and then it says the field diameter, which is 15.3 feet or 4.7 meters. So the throw distance, that is the distance between the source of light and the object it is hitting. The field diameter is the diameter of the pool of light that you would find on stage. And one of the things that makes lighting so complicated is that this applies if the light is faced straight down and it's making a perfect circle. Unfortunately, most of the light that we use comes in at an angle, so it makes an oblong or an oval light and makes for much more complicated lighting formulas to figure this out. So at 25 feet, you'll have a pool of light that's 15 feet wide, and it will put out 145 foot candles. So is a foot candle in relationship to lighting design. So one lighting designer says, for acting areas, you need 50 to 100 foot candles for an audience to see from 50 feet, providing that surrounding and background lighting levels are lower for contrast. But this is very subjective. What I cannot tell you is, in this theater, in this scene, you need exactly this number of foot candles to see that object. That is something you can only learn over working and your experience with lighting design. I know now by looking at this that if I look down, if I hung a 36-degree light at 45 feet away from the object I'm hitting, that I would not have enough light. It's only 45 foot candles. Now that would be plenty of light if it was 3 feet away from you. We're talking about an audience looking at what's going on stage. So unfortunately, I can't say, all right, for this theater, for this object, for this distance, you need this number of foot candles. All I can tell you is that this is what comes into play in terms of what lighting instruments you pick. So just to make things even more complicated. Okay, so we have this light, a source for 36 degree, which refers to the lens, it refers to the angle of the light, but it also refers to the lens size. And it is 25 feet from the object it is lighting. So that would put out 145 foot candles, as we said. That's with the light at 100% with no color media. And that would make it easily bright enough for an audience to see. But as you all know, most of the lights that we use in the theater have color media in front of them, and that cuts down the available light. So say this is a night scene and we want to use a blue color because it's night, and I pick this color, Apollo 4350. This only allows 14% of the light through. Every time you go to a swatch book, it will tell you the transmission of the light. It's extremely important. And the transmission goes from 5% to a light that has practically no color into it to the darkest blue, which can have 1% of the light coming through. So here we are with this instrument that puts out 145 foot candles, but now we have to multiply that by 14% once we put this color in. And then say we don't want to bring the light up to 100% because it's a nighttime scene. So now we have a light that put out 145 foot candles with 14% transmission, and it's at 50% because I want it to be a low light because it's night. So now that one light has put out 10 foot candles. We know that's not enough light for people to see. So how do we deal with that? Okay, so one of the things that always makes it brighter on stage, and always remember this when you're designing lights and you get stuck about something not being bright enough, things are only bright in relation to the things around them. So if I took every light out except for this one light, that would automatically make that light brighter. So let's say we need 50 foot candles like this designer says works. So we've got 10 foot candles with this one instrument with this gel at 50%. So here are our alternatives. Okay, so we have to hang 5 lights, exactly the same. That takes up 5 times as much energy, and it takes up 5 positions on a pipe. So that makes it very unwieldy. We could also bring the light up to 100%, and then we would get 20 foot candles. Still not enough light, and we would still need 2 or 3 lighting instruments to get the effect we want. Or we could hang the lighting instrument closer to the object that we want to hit. But as you all know, that is almost impossible in the theater because the beams, which are over the house, and the electrics, which are over the stage, are set at an established trim, which is their height. And in most theaters, you cannot adjust that, nor would you want to bring the electrics down onto the stage. So a lighting instrument is hanging 3 feet from an actor and you would see the entire pipe of light. So that's not a very good alternative as well. So probably the best answer to this is to use a different lens in the light. So source 4 lights all the way from 5 degrees all the way up to 90 degrees. So we've been talking about an example of 36 degrees. So I could put in a light that's got a 19 degree barrel or lens in it, and at 25 feet, that has 392 feet, excuse me, I don't know what the plural of foot candle is. It has 392 foot candles when there's no color and it's 100%. So if we use that instrument, now we're getting 27 foot candles with the color and the intensity we want. So we could get away with using 2 lighting instruments. So that is how complicated it is to pick a light. And if I could say to you, I need exactly this many foot candles to see something, then this would be a whole lot easier, but that's very subjective. It's not only based on what the audience can see, but it's based on how you want the scene to look. So anyway, you do need to take all these things into account when you are picking lighting instruments, when you pick your light plot. So when we get to that point of turning your concept and all your work into a light plot, I will, unless you can figure this out on your own, we'll meet and we'll talk about which kind of lighting instrument we need to get the effect that you want. But I just wanted you to know that all of those things come into play when you're picking a lighting instrument. Yeah.
So, maybe I missed this, but how many foot candles do you need for an audience to see?
That's what's subjective.
That's subjective.
Yeah.
Okay.
This designer, and I went online and said, okay, how many foot candles does it take to see something? And this one designer said 50 to 100 foot candles is enough for an audience to see from 50 feet away. But that's subjective. I can say, honestly, I would probably agree with him if I saw that that there was less than what I was picking, if the foot candles were under 50, I would probably say it's going to be for the audience to see that. But as I say, it's subjective. So it's just a matter of working with the different lights over time. It's just like working with color. It's only something you can do by experience.
And is this the thing that you regularly do when you're starting? I've never seen this before. Like you're like in a new theater or something. So you like look at the instruments that you have and you have knowledge of each of their foot candles and throw distance, like field diameters, all that.
Oh, I don't have that in here. I go to my photometrics book. I have a book that's got photometrics of every lighting instrument that's used. No, I do not. I have some of them, I know approximately.
Yeah.
But no, I have to look it up.
But why is it useful? I have little experience with lighting, but in my tiny experience with lighting, I don't know any of that information and then just play around.
Right.
Experiment or whatever.
But have you ever hung a light plot, or have you just gone in and used the lights that were there?
I have hung.
So how did you pick the lights?
Okay, I can't say I've ever had any control over that.
Uh-huh.
Unless I was doing it totally DIY using like clamp plates and stuff like that, which I have done.
Okay, so you mean when you've hung, you've done it from another designer's light plot? Yeah. So somebody has made that decision for you, knowing this information.
Okay.
So if I gave you a light plot like I did a year ago, you're kind of trusting that I put the right instruments up in the air so that you can actually
Right.
light it the way you want.
But it's the lighting designer's, not the electrician's job to have knowledge, or probably both of them, but the electrician has to know how much the plot is capable of holding. in terms of-
That would be the electrician.
That's the electrician's job. And
This is definitely the lighting designer's job. So he's not only picking the lights for what's the shape of the light, is it hard edge, is it soft edge, is it round or oblong? It's also how much light can it put out.
Yeah.
If you're doing something really bright and you hung up 5 Fresnels with 250 watt lamps in them, you couldn't get what you want. And so whether you're hanging the plot or you're looking at an existing plot, which you often do in a dance company, you go into a theater and the plot's there, you have to look at that information. But you have to assume that somebody knew something about what they were doing or they wouldn't have hung that light in that place.
this is why people get 4-year degrees in lighting design. It's way harder.
Yeah, it's really, really complicated. Yeah.
When you're working with LED instruments, does that change when the color changes in them? Since you're not actually using the gel, does that change the percentage of light output?
No, it's a little different, and I didn't actually bring it up here because it's kind of a whole other complicated thing. There are photometrics for LEDs, and to tell you honestly, I have not studied them that much in depth, but you're absolutely right. In terms of color, an LED, the darker you get, it's still going to maintain the same color. With these kind of conventional instruments, the darker you get, the warmer it gets because the color of the lamp or the light bulb is changing.
But if I take an LED bulb and make it blue, it would still be putting out
Right.
less actual foot candles than if it were white. even though it's
Oh,
not
yeah,
visual.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah, yeah. But the color itself wouldn't change, which is a huge advantage for LED lights. We'll look at that in a couple of weeks. We're going to spend a whole class on color, but you'll notice like you pick a blue light for your scene and then you want the light just to be at 30% and you turn out at 30%, that light is pink, not blue. And this information you can also find online, at least for Lee color. I haven't researched it for Roscoe, but it's really, really important because you all know from the work that you've done with the shows you've lit. You've never lit a show like, I want all the lights at 100%, and that's it. So, so the color, yeah, the color that we've been getting here, that's for the light at 100%. So I'm not asking you to remember this today. I'm just bringing it to your attention so that when we get to the making the light plot, that is of utmost importance. In addition to the design qualities of light, there is all the scientific part of it as well. One of the other major mathematical things we do, that lighting designers do, is so you have a light covering one area, and then as it gets farther from the center, just like it says, it gets dimmer. So if you want to, so say we want the lights to be even all the way across the front of the stage, which we often do with acting lights, we need to know at what point the lights are supposed to overlap with each other so that over here in the center of this beam, this light is 100%, but here the lights are at 50%, so it's going to take two of them to bring the intensity up to 100%. And that is not a real example. I'm just telling you that's some complications of it. And as I say, all of this has to do with the light facing straight down. Once you get into angling the light, you're dealing with a whole other thing. So let's forget about that for right now. I just wanted to bring it to your attention, and I will again probably in 3 or 4 weeks when we start going over the plot. So I wanted to speak just a little bit more about lighting in the real world before we start talking about lighting design in the theater or dance. And that is not the right page. Figure out what I did with my first page of my lecture. Okay. Oh. All right, this is really weird. Can I drop it on the floor? I didn't give it to anybody by mistake, did I? I think I must have it here and I'm just not. Here it is. Okay. Thank you for your patience. So I'm going to quote Jean Rosenthal again. As you find lighting designers, especially dance lighting designers, are constantly quoting Jean Rosenthal, who is the mother of modern lighting design for both theater and dance. So, and we're now talking again about lighting in the real world. Lighting affects everything light falls upon. How you see what you see, how you feel about it, and how you hear what you are hearing. I think it's the last part of that quote that I find particularly interesting. So here's some observations of lighting that we have in our lives. And this is just like the lighting observations that you did, but I just want to make some general observations about it. In order to see lighting, there must be a subject on which the light falls. We can't see light on its own. It has to hit an object. I don't know enough about physics to know other things in the atmosphere that it can hit, but for right now, let's just say an object, whether that be a person, a table, or a tree. So when you're looking at that light, you think, did someone design the lighting or did it just happen? So from a street lamp, yes, somebody designed that light. Somebody decided what kind of light to put there, so it's designed. So that's just another thing to know. And then what is your response to your lighting? And we just had 7 responses to the different lights that you saw. So I need to explain that very much. And then what do you think the desired response was? So when an engineer puts up a street lamp on the freeway, their desired, well, I don't know if it's a desired response, but the desire is it to be bright enough so you can drive a car. So I guess your desired response would be, it's bright enough so I can drive my car. So those are lighting instruments, just like the lighting instruments in the theater. And then, is there emotional meaning to the light we see? And you can pretty much say there is some emotional meaning to every light we see, including these hideous fluorescent lights, which we find in rooms, which makes us all look hideous. But I have done many plays where I've had to try to create that look on stage because I want people to look like they're in a classroom or in some institution. So, look at light. This is more information from Gillette, who wrote the Designing with Light book. We're still just talking about light in general. To recognize relationships between light and understanding, you first need to gain an understanding of how objects are lit in the real world. The following list provides a good beginning point for your study of meaning and light. Number 1, what is the light source? We just went over that. I don't think I need to tell you that. Sun, street, light, table lamp. How bright is the light? Self-explanatory. From what direction is the light striking the object? For example, light normally strikes most objects from multiple directions, some direct, some indirect, and we'll talk about what those words mean in a second. What are those directions? Is the light coming from overhead or the side? Is it coming straight from the front, or is it bouncing off the ground or a nearby wall? 4, is the light hard-edged or diffused? Are the edges of the shadows cast by the object sharp or fuzzy? What color is the light? Is it picking up color by being bounced off something else, grass, for instance, or is the color coming from the light itself? So since I brought it up, let's talk about indirect and direct light for a second. We've not only skipping over the whole mathematical side of lighting, we are also skipping over the whole history of lighting design, which the biggest influencers started at the same time that Wagner wrote his operas. And they determined that there are 2 types of physical light that we use, that we see on the stage. Indirect light, as I just mentioned, that's general illumination. So those kind of lights are like we call wash lights, or lights bouncing off a wall. They're usually soft edge. So in our theater, specifically, those lights are the Parnells that I showed you last week. The Pars, those are incapable of being specific hard-edged light. So that's the other kind of light. So it's indirect light, just described, and direct light, which is described here as being form-revealing light. I'll take that with a grain of salt, but it's generally a hard-edged light. In dance, side light is direct light. It's coming from a side angle. So moving over to actual lighting design. So there are also two types of lighting in terms of design. There is motivated, coming from a specific source. Where does the light come from? Which we've now said in about 14 different ways in the last half an hour. And motivational lighting, which is seeking a specific mood or audience response. How should the lighting affect? I think in a lot of dance lighting design, we are dealing with the second, but not always the case. It's that second thing, the motivational, seeking a specific mood or audience response, where it's probably the most complicated, but also the most interesting and has the most options. To go back to the motivated light for a second to tie this all together. So you'll have to see from your lighting observations, say, let's take Elizabeth's example of the light from the street lamp. So it came from a street lamp, so you know it came from a certain direction. However, it was diffused. I assume it was a diffused light and did not project a beam. Street lamps don't usually project a beam of light. It's a soft light. So if you went into a theater and say, okay, I want it to look like a street lamp, what instrument am I going to pick to do that? So first of all, we have to pick a soft edge light, a Par or Parnell, or we can actually pick a hard edge light that stick some frost in it or take it out of focus. But we need to put it in the same relationship as that street lamp was to the road or ground that it was hitting. We need to have that same relationship between that light source and the deck of the stage or the person standing on the stage. And that's why we start out by talking about what is the lighting that you see in the world. And I think we can say for all of the plays that you guys have picked, and they're all very different, which is great. I think all of them in their own way are going to be affected by motivated light, as well as, you know, the actual situation, indoor, outdoor, time of year, that sort of thing. So that's why we look at light. And, you know, in terms of the second thing, what do you think the desired response was? Is there an emotional meeting? How should the lighting affect the scene? That's where we do all our research. That's when we're going around in the world and we're looking at the feeling of what the light is instead of actually what are the physical attributes of that light. So, you know, you get a feeling. You guys not only talked about the attributes of the light, but you talked about the feeling of the light as well. So you're always gathering information all the time in your life about light. So may I go on to the next topic? You guys with me?
Can you define motivated light?
Okay, so motivated is kind of a strange word because it can be like light from a flashlight. So it's, you know where the light came from. I guess that's the easiest way to describe motivated light, as opposed to light that's there to create an emotional effect. You do not know. I mean, eventually you know what lighting instrument is, but you're talking about what effect it's making on the stage.
Oh, okay, so motivated is more like you're creating a look that evokes from people exactly what kind of light it is.
Exactly.
We are in a street light. This is next to a lamp
Mm-hmm.
on whatever.
Yeah, I mean, motivated is a kind of a strange word to use because it usually pertains to people rather than objects, but in this case, it applies to objects. We know the source of the light.
Versus
Let's call it
motivational.
source-based light.
I see.
Yeah.
Motivational is like I wanted to make everyone feel like this classroom was really scary, I would create a lighting look to make that true. But it has nothing to do with
Right, and you're trying to create a mood or get an emotional response from that, but you don't care about where that light came from. Okay, so let's move on to the theater. And I'm going to quote Jean Rosenthal once again. So this is interesting because we talk about collaboration all the time, but this is a different definition of collaboration. She says, collaboration is the most important aspect of lighting design. Lighting design is a collaborative profession in which the lighting designer collaborates with the backgrounds, things, purposes, and people. In the theater, the lighting designer's collaboration is with all these at once. No one can say the light in a play gave a good performance. So she's not talking about collaborating with the other designers working on the show. She's talking about collaborating with the scenery and the dancers, the background, the purposes, like we just talked about, the mood, the emotion, all of those things. I would think outside of this room, if somebody's talking about collaboration, they're not talking about this kind of collaboration, but I just thought this was interesting that that is the way that Jean Rosenthal described it. From another book that we're not using, lighting is a design element that contributes to the storytelling of the performance and enhances the audience's experience. Lighting is a tool for displaying what needs to be seen while hiding away those elements that distract from the storytelling. That's a kind of narrow way of looking at lighting design, but that's the way this particular designer looks at lighting design. And I think is really germane more to the theater than it is to dance.
So if that was a very narrow definition, what would be wrong?
So this is talking about storytelling. So he's talking about shining on a light on something to tell the story and taking those, putting the things in a way that are distracting from the storytelling. I guess in my mind, what I find a little confusing about this is that even the distracting things are part of the storytelling. So once again, it's a selection of that word, just like selecting the word motivated is a little confusing. I guess if you said displaying what needs to be seen and hiding away, it's like displaying what needs to be seen, kind of, period. It's almost like the second part of that sentence doesn't need to be said. But say it's in the theater and we have a solo dancer on the stage and there's a one down pool. I guess hiding the other elements away would be putting everything else away in the darkness. So my issue about that is if you're putting away all of those other things, that's actually affecting the lighting design to put the person there individually. So I'm not doing a very good job of interpreting what this person said, but I just thought it was interesting from a storytelling standpoint. And now that we talk about it more, I think you can just throw that idea away, unless you find it something that you can use in your work, something you can come back to. I think one thing that, since this class is more geared towards the theater students, and we in this school tend to teach theater from a dramaturgical standpoint, meaning that everything comes out of the play. Our work is to put the playwright's work on the stage. That is a very limited way of looking at the theater. There are all kinds of ways of theater that have really nothing to do with storytelling. But for the sake of this class and for the theater students, we are doing storytelling, the playwright story. Okay, so we are now going to talk about what are the properties of light. These are called the controllable qualities of light, and I think you'll find them all obvious to you, but you may not know the words. So there are 4 properties of light, and the first one is the most general. So the first controllable quality of light is distribution. Distribution is a catch-all term that refers to several elements: the direction from which the light approaches an area, actor, or object, the shape and size of the area that the light is covering, the quality of the light, its cohesiveness, clarity or diffusion, and the character of the light, its texture. Is it smooth, uneven, patterned, hard, or soft edge, and so forth. The focus of the lighting instruments determines both the pattern and position of highlights and shadows cast on the actors and their environment. So you can see that distribution covers a number of things that we then break down into angle and position, and texture, just like he says. We could take all of those things. But for the sake of this, and this generally way it's used in the theater, that catch-all phrase is distribution. So the second controllable quality of light is intensity. Intensity is the term that refers to the actual amount of light, its level of brightness, striking the stage or actor. The most common way a lighting designer can control the intensity of lighting instruments is by adjusting the dimmers to which those instruments are connected, making it at 10% or 100%. The intensity range can vary from total darkness to painfully brilliant white light. The normal range of intensity for stage lights typically lies somewhere between these two extremes and is modified to suit the needs of a particular scene or moment in the play. Intensity is not only controlled by the level at which a light is programmed at 10% or 100% or somewhere in between. Intensity can also be controlled by color. If the light's at 100% and we put color in there and it's only letting 14% of the light in, it's 14% intensity. You can put different lamps in the same instruments and it would lower the intensity. And then there's also some other things that we talk about when it has to do with intensity. And these things, there are things I just wanted to mention. They're not, I wouldn't say that they're necessarily part of the definition of controllable qualities, but things that you always need to be concerned about in terms of intensity. So there is the audience's subjective impression of brightness. It's really important in lighting design, stepping out of this for a second. When you're doing a lighting design, you not only have to look at it through your eyes, you have to look at it through the audience's eyes and say, is this what I want the audience to see? Like, oh, to me, blue represents evil. Well, if you put that through the audience's eyes, are they going to perceive that light as evil? So you always have to think of it from what is the audience going to see. That was a general thing that applied to more than intensity, but all the qualities of light. There's visual fatigue. When somebody is looking at a bright white light for too long, it fatigues your eyes. There's visual perception, which is, I think, when we talk about if I'm standing in a light and there are all these lights around me, you'll perceive the intensity of the light is a certain way. If we take out all the lights and I'm still standing in that light, you will perceive that that light is much brighter, even though it isn't. The other thing about intensity I wanted to mention is there is mood associated with brightness. So I think if you just think about that for a second, it's fairly obvious. So it's more than just, can we see it or can we not see it? So the third controllable quality of light is movement. Movement can be divided into three general categories. The first and most obvious, and the ones that we all know, is the time duration of a light cue. That's the movement of that light. The length of time it takes for the lights of one cue to come up or go out. The other thing is the movement of onstage lights, such as a lantern or a candle that an actor carries across the stage. And the third is the movement of certain offstage light sources, like a follow spot or a moving light fixture. When people talk about movement in general, if they don't go into this definition, they're mainly talking about light cues. But I just wanted you to know what the other obvious ways that light can move. And the last controllable quality of light is color. Color is an extremely powerful tool that will be discussed at length in this class 2 weeks from now, and what should be discussed at length. We've often talked about color as being a lab class that we offer here, which we probably will at some point, and spend an entire semester talking about color theory and all of the other things related to color. But for right now, let's just skip over that, and we will talk about it in 2 weeks. So now we know what the controllable qualities of light are. So now, what are the objectives or function of the lighting design? First of all, also reading from Gillette, stage lighting design can be defined as the creative use of illumination to enhance the spectator's understanding and appreciation of the production by visually supporting the production concept. To achieve this goal, stage lighting must perform several basic functions. First of all, visibility. The lighting for any production must make the actors' costumes and sets clearly visible to the audience. We're talking about theater here, not dance. At the same time, because light affects meaning, it is equally important that the audience see those people and things only as the designer, director, and the other members of the production design team want them to be seen. All right, the second function of stage lighting, just so you know, when we're done with this section, we're going to look at some slides and I'm going to give you some examples. So the second one is selective focus. Selective focus means directing the audience's attention to a specific area of the stage. The lighting designer can selectively focus attention in a number of ways, but frequently does so by increasing the intensity of the light or increasing the intensity of the lights on the desired area of interest. When this happens, all areas that are less brightly lit become of secondary importance to the audience. A common example of the use of selective focus occurs when the lighting designer reduces the intensity of the lights on one area of a unit set while increasing it on another. Instinct literally forces the audience to look at the brighter area. A more subtle use of selective focus can be seen in the lighting designs for most interior settings. In these designs, the lights are usually brighter in the major acting areas than they are in the upstage corners of the set, where there is little, if any, action during the course of the play. The most extreme use of the selective focus can be seen in almost any musical, where the audience's attention is directed to the lead singer by the use of one or more follow spots. That's kind of the ultimate selective focus. The third function of stage lighting, and the most important function in dance lighting, is model or sculpturing. Lights can be thought of as a plastic sculptural medium that is used to reveal form through the creation of highlight and shadow. Our perception of the forms of actors or dancers can be changed or modified by controlling and manipulating the patterns of highlight and shadow on their faces and bodies. In dance, the use of side light highlights and accentuates the edges and vertical line of the body and makes those dancers seem taller and thinner than they are. Direction is the primary element used in modeling, although intensity, movement, and color all affect modeling to a lesser degree. A change in any or all of these variables will inevitably result in an apparent change of form and feeling in the object being lit. So I think we know what modeling and sculptural mean, but I think what he's pointing out is that basically comes from the mixture of highlight and shadow. When you break it down, those are really the two things that we're dealing with. And those two things can be affected by the four controllable functions of light. Excuse me, the controllable qualities of light. Color, again. I wanted to talk about just one thing about color in terms of the controllable qualities of light. I'm talking about it now, we'll talk about it a little bit later, is how we perceive color on stage. So when we look at something, we have our visual perception. I'm looking at your jacket, it's gray. That's my perception of looking at your jacket. There is also my cultural perception of that. If I see a woman in white, generally in Western world, we tend to think of that as purity or wedding. That is not true in all cultures in the world. So there's a cultural perception of color.
It's also racist.
What?
I'm just saying, it's also racist, our perception of white.
Uh-huh. I mean, in the same way that, say, in China, seeing red would be, like red, I'm not exactly positive about this, but I think red is sometimes used in Chinese and they perceive it like we perceive white. Are you talking about it in those terms?
Oh, it just connects with my research on white supremacy and in the ways that Western culture like has embodied these things like so deeply within us that we have these associations of whiteness with purity and holiness and Jesus Christ and redemption and good.
Right.
It's just like this binary way of thinking about it versus blackness.
Right, because cultural perception is necessarily a historical perception.
Yeah. So how interesting would it be to try to disorient staff and play with different kinds of interpretations of like non-binary, like perceptions of light or something. Sorry, that's theoretical.
Well, I would love to see you give an example of it sometime so I can, I do understand theoretically what you're talking about, but it would take a lot more thought on my part to figure out what would be an example of that.
I was just saying that out loud. Okay.
So then here's your personal perception of a color. You see a color and it makes you have a personal perception based on your life. You perceive certain colors certain ways. And that's not just a color like purple, orange, or red. That's like all the shades and tones of every color within each one of those hues. And then there's relational perception. For instance, in West Side Story, a lot of times you see the gangs in two different hues. If you just had one, it wouldn't mean anything. But if you have the Jets in orange and you have the Sharks in blue, you know that they are using color to make a relational perception. All right. Okay, so let's talk about the other functions of light. I want to talk about mood. So creating a mood with light is one of the easiest and at the same time most difficult aspects of stage lighting. It is relatively easy to create a spectacular sunset effect or a sinister feeling of lurking terror. The difficulty comes in integrating these impressive effects with the other elements of the production. Effective stage lighting, even though it greatly affects meaning, is subtle and rarely noticed. Although it is fun to create a sunset or similar breathtaking visual display, the opportunity to do so legitimately does not present itself in many plays. If you're doing a light show, then it's all about the lights. But when we're doing plays, it's not about the lights. Within the parameters of the production concept, staged lighting is usually designed to enhance the mood of the play as unobtrusively as possible. Intensity levels may be varied slightly to shift focus, change color, or create a mood, but the movement of the light generally must be so restrained that it will be felt by the audience rather than seen. And he's talking about naturalistic or realistic styles of play here, just so you know. Lighting handled subtly and with precision can be used to create or shift the environmental mood without distracting the audience or calling attention to itself. So, those are the four objectives or function of lighting design: visibility, selective focus, modeling or sculptural quality, and mood. And the tools we have to use that are, what are the tools that we have to do that? We have color, we have intensity, we have distribution, and what's the other one we have? Movement. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to look at some pictures now from a famous designer. Some of these So I have these mixed together and not in any order because I kind of wanted the plays I was referring to get together. So I have written down some of the functions or some of the purpose that these slides show. That there are many others, so I urge you to make comments as we go along. All right. Here is our first picture. Starring Hannah from the play we most recently saw. So we're doing a children's play, and it's extremely important that we make Hannah visible. But I did not just take one white light, like the light coming from that projector, and shine it on the front of her face. That would make her look very uninteresting and very flat and very boring to the audience. So you can see she has a shadow on one side of her face. She has lavender light down here. It's lighting her, actually in this case, from the side. And you can see that her face has a sculptural quality. And at the same time, really the basic purpose of this was to highlight Hannah. So it's basically intensity. Okay, this is from Spring Awakening, which is, I think, before anybody was here.
Yeah.
So you can see the way color is used here, and composition, and color and composition. This set, by the way, was designed by Rogelio, choreography by Ja Wu, for a lot of you don't know who she is, but you will next year. And here we are in another scene, another dance from the same piece. These all come from the rock and roll part of the play. There are other scenes that were lived completely different. But you can see the same space has changed radically by the use of color, selective focus, and texture. Another scene. You can see what I really think I like about the scene is yellow is a very hard color to use on stage, and it tends to make people ugly. And Michael may look ugly in that picture, but I think it doesn't. I don't think the overall composition of the piece makes it look ugly at all. And you can see this in this case, the light looks like it's coming straight from the side, and he has light, another color coming from the other side. And we are putting him in focus by putting everybody else in red light. These lights are probably at the same intensity as this light, because there's color in them, they become less, there's less focus on them. Okay, this is a production of the Karamazovs, which I did when I was in school. And I just wanted to show you how color affects scenery. That's the same set. And this is also the same set. So you can see how color affects the mood of the scene. We will talk about color and scenery in 2 weeks. It's one of those things that's easy to forget when you're a beginning designer, but when you do your first play, and you'll see what happens. If we just had acting lights and didn't do anything to light the scenery, you would end up with, a stripe of white light right across the scenery. Okay, this is also from the same play. This scene, there's a white scrim in the middle of the stage, which is not hung very long. But you can see the texture. These are just gobos that are out of focus, that are coming from the side. They're not actually cloud gobos. Doing this, I learned about using gobos and side lights, and it's really fantastic. You can, without the audience even perceiving that they're seeing texture, you can add so much texture to the body by using gobos and side lights if it's used subtly. So the scrim is lit a certain way, and then we have these 2 people who are dancing in the center, lit with side light. It's obvious in all these pictures that the lights were designed for selective focus as well. But this is my favorite picture of any of the work I've ever done, and this really is all about composition. And it just looks like a beautiful painting. Yeah, I'm really impressed by my own work.
That's beautiful.
This is also from the same piece. And you get psychological effect. The light is the evil character in, well, I don't know if there's one evil character in Karamazov's, but he was put in a red light. This was a moment that I fought the director on, but eventually just gave up on. I come from the school that in the end, the choreographer or the director is always right. There's no such thing as the lighting designer making the final decision. So that's where I come from. Also the same piece, you can see how using one light can be used so effectively to tell a huge story. Okay, this is from our production of Angels in America. And I think it represents well the mixture of texture, the soft and hard, just of the lighting, but also the scenery and costumes as well. There's a window pattern from a goat that's coming across the headboard. Her face is intentionally in the dark. That tells such a strong story on its own. Same scene.
Is that a woman playing?
Excuse me?
There was a woman playing that role?
No, he had his wife. I know his wife in the piece. Yes, I forget her name. She has a man's name. Yes, one of the leading main parts. They're the three leading guys. One of them's married. The Mormon. They're the Mormons.
I've only ever seen the movie.
Yeah, I'm not sure who played the part in the movie. But I showed this picture just because imagine the scene with just work lights on instead of stage lighting on. Same set. This is a unit set. Just another example of how lighting can tell a story. And texture, you can see besides the texture of the paint job on the deck, what the lighting does in terms of texture, focus. The thing I like about this picture is, if you looked at it quickly, you could think this person's standing in the dark. But by lighting her, I think it's her, or people in drag in the show, just from the top, it's telling a story in and of itself of her isolation, and we don't really need to see her face to know that that the focus is on her. And clearly the director, Ms. Reed Davis, made the decision that we don't need to see her mouth so we can hear the lines. In the theater, 99% of the time, it needs to be right enough so people can see people's faces, otherwise they can't hear what's going on. Same play, this is when it's freezing on stage, just the use of, basically just using color to create a cold environment. Same set, backstage in the dressing room when he's getting in drag. Where one night, he strips down in the show and one night decided to do full frontal in the theater, which is pretty funny. Not really legal in the St. Mary's State. He did it anyway, probably closing night. But just another example of how one can light the same space and how much the lighting is creating the mood. This is the same, this is Angels in America as well. That's Kathleen.
I think I'm the only one who's saying.
She played the role that Meryl Streep played in the television version, the woman who plays multiple parts. So this is a perfect example of motivated light. It's supposed to be lit by a fire that's inside this oil drum. So there is a light with an orange gel in it coming from that direction, and that one light can tell the entire story. Never think that you have to have a lot of lights to do a lighting design. Last summer, Vanessa Freeman, who just graduated out of MFA, In dance here at St. Mary's, did a piece in Art 105. She had 2 lights, and it was an amazing lighting design. She used these 2 lights, and she also manipulated the sunlight by covering and uncovering parts of the window. But, you know, any story, any design can be done with any amount of lighting. I'm sure, you know, like at Shaw Anderson, how many lights do you have there?
14.
Yeah, and you've probably seen people do incredible things. And even before you had those 14 lights, you probably still were able to tell some pretty amazing stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, having limitations can be very, very inspiring. And this is generally true of all design, not just lighting design. But anything that one wants, the feeling that one's after, or what the director or choreographer wants to tell in that moment, can always be stripped down to the point of doing it with 1 light, or it can be done with 1,000 lights. This is the way I did shotgun, seagull inheritance. I just wanted to show the way. Also a unit set. This is all tons of sand that was brought onto this page. Later in the same scene. And then at night later in the same scene. So a good example of how lighting scenery affects what you're looking at. This is from Sweeney Todd. And so this piece used, I tend to use a lot of color in my design sometimes. So there was a lot of color. There's actually a lot of color kind of coding in this piece. And there was a lot of side light. This set came out over the audience like the set for Impure Thoughts does. And we had to build lighting trees in the theater to light people. But you can see everything going on there to create composition. Here's a good example of use of modeling and sculptural quality in the theater. You can see all the light and shadows. It's very near the end of Sweeney Todd. It looks like it was done all with like white and yellow light. It's particularly the angle of the light, which looks like it was a low side light or shin light that's doing most of the work here. And then the play we just did, Jesus Moonwalks. This is like an ideal example of selective focus using color on stage. And still, I mean, you can see enough of the noose in the background that the scene was just chilling. So I have other topics to do today, but I feel like I've gone over a fair amount of information and would really like to hear anything from any of you, any questions, anything that you've learned. We'll keep coming back to these all the time. But the next thing I wanted to go into is actually about the design process. So I didn't really want to go into that. We will have time to do that probably 3 weeks from now. We'll go into the design process. We also, and I believe I posted these on Moodle. questions for the director. You guys don't have a director, you're the entire production team. Questions to ask yourself in terms of your project. And I know, KJ, you know about using this. It actually comes from questions for the choreographer. It's very helpful in dance because it's like, how do I start the conversation? But just like I talked about earlier, let me just read this one thing, and then we'll stop. We won't talk about process, but I do want to talk about this thing about language and communication. The lighting designer must have a command of both design aesthetics and technological know-how, an impeccable artistic eye with the understanding of the equipment necessary to execute the desired look on stage. In addition, lighting designers must be excellent collaborators, since their work affects every other visual aspect of the production. Perhaps most importantly, the lighting designer should be skilled at describing the use of lighting and how it will emotionally, psychologically, and artistically affect the production and given moments of the show. While this may seem like a simple task, consider for a moment the ephemeral nature of light and the way in which light interacts with the world around us on a daily basis. Try to describe a sunset or the glow of light after a thunderstorm. Most people take the lighting around them for granted. Lighting designers have spent years developing the ability to assess a visual moment and understand all of the component parts that made up the feeling of that moment. The angle of the light, its brightness, quality, colors, shadows, and texture. When collaborating with a lighting designer, it is useful to have a common language for discussing light. To those ends, yeah, that's the end of that. So it's just to remind you that you not only have to communicate your design through your design, you need to communicate your design in words so that you can talk to a choreographer or talk to a director or to other designers. And that's why it's so important. We talked about the use of vocabulary and listening to what other people may say. I've noticed for myself that a director may use a certain word in a sentence that just like opens up an entire lighting design to me. So you really do need to learn to communicate in words, and it's really difficult, and I still have a difficult time doing it for obvious reasons. Light is very hard to describe. And you can't describe to a director or choreographer by saying, I'm going to use a source 436 degree from a mid position. I go, what? Or, you know, they may know it, but that's not how you communicate with design. So, anything? Anybody have anything? Okay, so next week, you are not required to come to class. The class is going to start in the light lab, and the MFA students have a lab assignment to show us their lighting flower arrangement. No cues, just using color and angle to light the flower arrangement. And after that, we are going to talk about the certain elements of dance that are specific to dance when it comes to lighting. And I'm going to report on a symposium I went to in October. 2 weeks from now, when some of you will be gone next week, and some of you will be on the week after, and we will meet in the theater 2 weeks from today to talk about color. Okay, thank you guys. Yeah.
5 hours school or 10 hours?
10 hours. 5 hours of hang, 5 hours of focus.